Well, he brought the world of August Wilson to life in the latest Netflix adaptation of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. He's cinematographer Tobias Schiessler, and I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. I'm, you, I heard kind of came on sort of late in the process to this, right before shooting started. And so I'm wondering, what was your preparation process look like when you are short on time?
Um, well, it was definitely, running a little sprint there at the beginning. I came in, I only had 13 days of prep beforehand. And, Mark Ricker was amazing, the production designer. He immediately, once I arrived in Pittsburgh, he took me through all the set drawings. And then I had a long meeting with George, our director, George Wolf, first thing. And he just basically took me through the movie. And, we went through some references. There was one specific print that Mark Ricker had found of Chicago in 1906 that really showed Chicago in the heat in the summer, and that was kind of our reference for the tone of the movie. And then it was, for George, it was very clear he wanted, this is a movie about the actors. And he did not want to distract anything with the camera or with lighting, so it became clear in terms of our storyboarding and shot listing that it was really about capturing those performances.
Yeah.
And
And
then, having only 13 days of prep, it was like scouting locations immediately and starting prepping the sets that we had built. So.
well, speaking of those sets, the interesting thing about this story is that it takes place mostly in two rooms, since it's based on this play. You have these two kind of studios that are very intimate, very small. So what was the challenge there of trying to make those spaces seem dynamic and cinematic?
That was definitely my biggest challenge. And that was, when I first read it, I was quite scared of it because what do you do in a 20 by 20, the basement room, for example, being a
Mhm.
20 by 20-foot room, having four actors, and, sometimes 6, 7 minute long monologues. But, you know, um, George kind of explained it to me. He said, like, think of it as a boxing game or boxing fight, right? Instead of gloves, they're using the words, but they're coming from each one of them will have their corner, but they will come and attack each other and spar or fight. And he'll orchestrate, use the choreography of a fight basically. And so that became kind of like that gave me the idea also of camera movement. It became clear how he's going to move, the actors, how he's going to block it, and that helped a lot because he made it become alive with the actors and his blocking.
Mhm.
He's amazing when it comes to choreography and blocking of the actors. And then is the biggest challenge was, George didn't want to break up the scenes, the monologues, especially not the emotional ones. So we had to figure out, I only got usually I use two cameras at the same time, but it was like specifically, placing those cameras. There's, one of the most emotional scenes that Chadwick had was when he talked about his mother being raped and his father being killed, and there was no interruption of that scene. So we had two cameras lined up on dollies and sliders that would basically capture the whole performance, like the 6 minute performance. And then we only got in at the end and did some coverage on the other band members. But it was basically shot in one take. So that was a challenge in that room for sure.
Yeah.
And then just creating that heat that George wanted. He wanted to have a heat inside those rooms, feel like the heat is in those rooms that they can't escape.
Mhm. I was interested by, I was wondering how you approached lighting for, especially that rehearsal room, because there's really just kind of one window there available for natural light. So how did you think of lighting in that space?
Well, that was, at the beginning, when I first read the script, actually, there was no window. It was explained as a windowless storage room, no light, no anything. And that window came about when we were scouting a warehouse. Mark wanted George and myself to kind of just see the kind of texture he wanted to and color he wanted to do for the set. And we walked in this room that had this tiny little window up on top that the sun came just perfectly through. I took a picture of it. It reminded of a Caravaggio painting, and we thought that suddenly, like, actually, the window will help us give that idea of the heat outside or a place they can't get to because we set the window really high up. But yeah, that became my main lighting source for for that room. I had like 50,000 watts of light burning through that window. I had like a 20K, two 10Ks, two 5Ks. That was sort of my one motivation for light. And then the rest, I just kind of kept the really, um, light overhead ambient. And so basically, we were able to shoot like 270 degrees, sometimes 360 degrees in the room without doing any relights.
Wow. And since this started out as a play, August Wilson is all about the language, which is sort of different than a lot of films. And so I'm wondering, you already talked about kind of shooting simultaneously with multiple cameras. Was there anything else you had to adjust in your normal techniques in order to sort of make that language shine through?
Well, it was being there. I mean, the main thing was to be there at the right time with the camera at the right, at the right place. It was sort of, and we didn't want to lock the actors in that much either, that to hit each spot exactly. We didn't put any marks down or anything, but it was really like one of those things where everyone had to be on top of their game. My dolly grips, my camera operators, because it was a lot of times it was, shooting like a live performance and adjust, as the actors are moving in different places, we had to adjust to on the fly. And so it was really like, it was magical sometimes how it all kind of came together in that room. I was really scared of it at the beginning, and then at the end, I kind of missed it when we were done with it.
What I noticed too is that, you have these monologues that are performed beautifully and you let the actors shine there, but there's also a way you kind of use angles in hallways or in door frames where the camera's either like peering around a corner or peering around a character. Where did that sort of motif come from?
That was something that really George wanted to have. There's, for example, the scene where Chadwick is really sort of behind the wall, where we just stare on him because he wanted to just be on Chadwick's reaction of what was Coleman Domingo's monologue speech, that he was sitting at the piano, but basically we kept him soft in the background even though he was talking, and we kind of pushed in onto Chadwick, which was way more powerful than cutting to Coleman at that moment. So that was something that was George's thought behind some of those scenes playing it that way.
Yeah. I was wondering, it probably felt like more of a relief to get to film those scenes under the big performance tent for Ma Rainey's performances, because you do get to open it up a little bit there. How did that compare to like figuring out how to shoot in those tiny rooms?
Well, that was actually, we shot most of the tent scene, the Chicago theater. We shot it all at the beginning of the movie. Obviously, the more room you have, you have more freedom for lighting. I thought it was interesting how he approached those scenes, because the first scene is in the tent is really where she's performing in the South to an audience that really is a fan base, and she has a really close interaction with them. And so George wanted to every shot kind of combine the audience in the tent scene, in the first performance scene, and then when it cuts to the Chicago. When she had moved up north, he wanted to show that she didn't have any, she had no interaction with the audience, with the northern audience yet, and so we shot the whole Chicago theater without any audience, and never connecting them really, and it came to the point where we did, and I don't think you would see it in the movie. George wanted me to light it to a contrast that if we're behind when Viola Davis is performing, when we're behind her, when we really should see an audience outside, I played the ratio of that spotlight so bright that you kind of automatically, by that there is that you can't see the audience, right? Just because of the lighting ratio, but there was really no audience there. So I thought that was really clever how he played that.
Yeah. You also worked on Dreamgirls, which is a big musical. Do you feel like that prepared you in a way in how to capture a musical number and find the musicality of it?
Definitely helped. I worked at the time on Dreamgirls. I worked with Jules Fisher and Peggy Eisenhower, who were like the most incredible theatrical lighting designers, right? So that was my big learning curve for theatrical lighting with them because I got so much help from them on that movie, and that gave me kind of a heads up on what to expect for those scenes. But for Ma Rainey, we really wanted to be authentic to the time, right? I didn't do anything that wasn't really authentic lighting. Like we didn't. For example, in the tent, we just had these, practical light bulbs that were lighting sort of the ambient, and then we had some footlights, and that's all I used. I had a little light on Viola just to stand her out a little bit, but there was no kind of theatrical lighting there. And when we got to Chicago, we actually used period correct park hands that I had off to the sides on trees that we used, and I did. We wanted to use a time period spotlight, but we couldn't get it at the time, so I had to use a more modern one. But it's the same kind of quality. But the idea was not to use anything that we couldn't use at the time.
Yeah. That number too, everything under the tent, you mentioned the whole movie has this heat to it. It's this hot summer day, but really under that tent specifically, it feels very sweltering and sweaty. Is there a trick to sort of capturing that? How do you get that heat on camera?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with makeup too, right? And makeup is so amazing on Viola. A lot of times, get that shine and the sweat, and then I think the wardrobe too. It's always like she's always dressed so, big coats and everything for under. I think you just feel the heat just seeing her dressed this way. But I actually used a filter. It's called the Tiffin Glimmer Glass. It's called a bronze glimmer glass that I used, which kind of blooms the highlights a little bit, but also gives some warmth into the highlights. And I felt like that I tested those filters at the beginning in the camera test, and I felt like that they kind of helped me show the heat of the light in a sense.
You mentioned too about being period specific with a lot of your techniques. How did you land on, the sort of camera look you have? Because it's a very, modern contemporary look to it rather than sort of going with sort of a grainy lens or something like that. How did you land on that choice?
I actually thought first to go with a more vintage lenses. Just for that reason, it felt like obvious for a period piece to me to maybe go a little grainier or have the lenses not be so perfect. And I tested like Canon K35s and Leica lenses, or the Leica lenses that are large format, and what I usually do is in my tests, I test them for flares, I test them for focus racking, how they breathe or not breathe, how they distort on wider lenses. And I also brought, Kessler Camera sent me the Zeiss Supremes that we ended up using. I tested them, but they're much cleaner lens. But when I showed the differences to George, he felt like that the cleaner lenses would work better for him with the actors, for that there is absolutely no distraction. We wanted to be close and wide a lot of times, and he felt like that the older lenses were distorting too much, that it would take away from the performance. So that's how we ended up with a fairly clean look.
Yeah. And the fun part for me, because I know about this, I've seen this play many times, but the movie ends with actually a different scene. It has an additional ending on it where we see that this white band is now recording Levy's song. And for cinematographers, is there ever like a pressure when you're thinking about the final scene and the final shot to come up with something clever or lasting? How do you approach the final shot of a movie?
Well, it was what it was, right? Like it's the scene, and we wanted to feel like there was a lot of warmth beforehand, so we changed it at the end for that performance for them in the same recording studio. I lit it much cooler and desaturated the look much more than it was before, just to give that feeling of the coldness of what happened. So that was sort of in lighting wise, but. Other than that, I don't think we made a special, effort of this, of making it like a special end shot necessarily. But it was more in the lighting and the desaturated look that kind of gave that feeling of what happened.
And I wanted to ask you about your resume before I have to let you go, because you have worked on so many, like, I think a lot of cinematographers get known for a specific style or working on a specific type of movie. You have such an eclectic resume, from Dreamgirls to Lone Survivor, Beauty and the Beast to now Ma Rainey. It's a wide different range of movies and directors and styles. So is that something you specifically sought after? Is that variety in your work?
I think I really, for me, it's like working with directors that I like to work with. It's more that, and then just I've been very fortunate to have worked a lot with Bill Condon and Peter Berg, that really both of them have very different styles. They're both incredible storytellers, but so I've been very fortunate to do these really extremely different movies with these two directors that just tell different stories, right? So I think it's come about with them mostly, right? Because I did Friday Night Lights, and the next thing I did was Dreamgirls, which you couldn't find two different type of movies, right? Which I really enjoy, right? I didn't know, for example, I didn't know anything about Friday Night Lights at the time, like about American football. I grew up in Germany, and I actually had a meeting with Pete Berg after we had done the rundown. We had lunch together, and he says, "What do you think about American football?" And I go like, "Pete, I've never watched a game in my life before. It's not my sport at all." He goes, "Well, then you're the wrong cinematographer for my movie. I'm doing this movie on high school football in Texas." And I went out, bought a book, Dummies for Football for Dummies, and I did I did research, and I put together sort of a visual reference book for him to see how I would approach it, and he felt like I had the right idea, and I got the job. But it was a real challenge for me, not knowing that world at all, and then bringing it on screen. And I think it's still one of sort of those movies that people reference all the time. And that's the fun part, right? Doing something like that, and then the next movie on stage with Beyonce and Jennifer Hudson, and they're performing, and that was one of the most incredible moments, right? Being next to them as they're performing with my little highlight that I'm carrying around as they're, yeah, it was incredible. So I find it the fun part. That's the same thing from Beauty and the Beast to Lone Survivor, where you're suddenly up, doing a war movie instead of a Disney, magical thing. So I like that. I love the idea of doing something that I hadn't done before, that I don't know that much about, and having a variety.
Yeah. Well, it's an incredible addition here with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and we can't wait to see what style and genres you tackle next. So,
Well,
everyone who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Keep in touch with us throughout the awards season. And Tobias, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.